afternoon, college football enthusiasts. Today is the Week 11 recap and then the Week 12 outlook. Last week we missed you because of Veterans Day. Thank you, veterans. But we want to start with the college football rankings. So we have Georgia at number 1, Ohio State number 2, Michigan at 3, TCU at 4, Tennessee at 5, and then LSU at 6. So what are your thoughts on those rankings there?
As far as like the top 4 go, I think they got them right.
Yeah,
I know TCU's not getting a lot of love, but at this point in the year, if you're in a major conference and you're undefeated, I think you got to be up there until you lose. Do I think TCU would have a chance in the playoffs if the playoffs started today? No, I think they get obliterated. But at the same time, like I don't feel comfortable putting a 1-loss or a 2-loss team ahead of them. So I think for the most part they got it right. The Michigan, Ohio State, I'd be comfortable. 2, 3 doesn't really matter there. To me, they're interchangeable, and it doesn't matter at all because they're going to play each other.
Yeah.
So who cares what your ranking is now? Like it's a top 5 matchup next 2 weeks when they play, and realistically, only one of those teams is going to get in. We maybe talk about some playoff scenarios, but realistically, like the playoffs start in Columbus when Michigan comes into town after Thanksgiving. So that doesn't really matter. Tennessee's kind of like floating out there as this 1-loss team, but they're not going to get a chance to play in the SEC title game. So maybe you have chaos if LSU like wins that or something. Wins the SEC title game, and then like you got to figure out how to juggle Georgia and Tennessee and all this stuff. But I think for the most part the committee got it right this week. No big gripes with the rankings.
The only issue I have is LSU at 6. They only won against Arkansas by 3, and I know it was a different environment, but still for a team who just beat Alabama, I feel like they could have done much better in that game, and I feel like they shouldn't have moved up at all. They might have stayed the same. The only reason I see them being put there is because they maybe didn't really have anyone else to put there. Because, they have 2 losses, sure, but everyone else also has 1 loss. Like, there's not really that many unbeaten teams right now.
That's a good point. When I was reading some college football blogs this week, and some people were bringing up issues they had with the rankings, and LSU did come up. I'm okay with LSU there, personally. But if you have an issue with the top 6 or top 10 or whatever, and you want to bump LSU down, who do you put in their place? Like, what team has a resume, that would be worthy of being kind of where they are, or they show that they're a caliber team that deserves to be there? And there's not a standout team this year that is just leaps and bounds better than everyone. I think everyone thought Georgia was probably the best team in college football almost all year last year. There's been years where Ohio State's looked like the clear front runner, or Clemson, Trevor Lawrence was there. There's not a clear front runner this year, so if you're going to take someone out, you got to figure out who to place in there, and there's a lot of flawed teams this year, which makes the games more exciting.
Yeah, I think if Tennessee can get in the top 4, it'll be very, 1 through 4, I think all teams will have a chance. TCU maybe has a chance, it's just time will tell maybe, but I think if Tennessee can get in there with how high power their offense is, I think it makes it interesting for each team to be able to have a chance. Some years, the 4th seed just kind of they're probably going to get destroyed. But depending on who that 4th seed is, they have a chance to actually do some damage. Mm-hmm. And then we had some upsets, not many, but UCLA loses to Arizona, and then Boston College knocks off North Carolina State, which I don't know how North Carolina State's still ranked this week. I think they've been ranked for far too long.
Yeah, we've talked about that before. I'm not a fan of ACC football. I don't think they're competitive. I don't think the Big 12 is necessarily competitive this year, and I would rank the ACC well below the Big 12. Yeah. So I was glad to see North Carolina State finally drop. Hopefully we can stop talking about them. They're not a legitimate football team. I was most surprised by UCLA.
Yeah.
I think they have a good foundation. They're a good quarterback. They can run the ball very well. They have some athletes. I thought they might make a little more noise this year. A little surprised, a little disappointed. We'll talk about them in their matchup this week again, but that was the big one for me.
Yeah, and then LSU, as mentioned, just escapes Arkansas, which obviously was not ideal for LSU. And then I don't know if you saw, they were The grounds crew is putting like water on the field, hopefully it would melt the ice and the snow, which I don't know, whatever. And then USC beats Oregon, I think that past week.
Mm-hmm.
And Ohio State played who did they play last week?
They had an easy game. Was that Rutgers last week? Easy matchup for them. No real struggles there. Maybe it was Indiana last week. The weeks are flying by.
I think it was Indiana.
Yeah. That was not Indiana. Really couldn't keep up.
Yeah.
Indiana's been a pretty big disappointment, I think, in the Big Ten this year. Tom Allen got a lot of hype. Had some early wins early in his tenure there, and now that they have to have expectations and people expect them to somewhat compete. I don't think anyone thinks Indiana's on par with Ohio State or Michigan, but I don't think anyone saw the season unfolding. Penix leaves, and he's leading passer in the country right now out west, and it's kind of like what could have been almost.
I think it's crazy that they knocked off Illinois like first week of the season, and then Illinois had that long stretch, and like that loss is actually very crucial with the standings for the Big Ten West.
Yes.
Which Purdue beating Illinois also keeps them in it. I don't know why they can't just beat teams are supposed to beat like Iowa, and then they beat Illinois, which I don't like Illinois either. But whatever.
So is Purdue is that the team that you think is going to win the Big Ten West when it's all said and done?
I think they have the best chance because Iowa still has to face a Minnesota team that's at least solid, and Purdue just needs to win out. They have Northwestern, which this week probably easy win, and then IU, which obviously rivalry game, so don't want to take anything for granted there. But then Illinois needs to win out with the Purdue loss. So honestly, I think Illinois is out of it. I don't think Purdue loses. So the only reason I see Purdue not getting in is because if Iowa wins out, which if Iowa wins out, they get in. If Purdue wins out, they need the Iowa loss. But Minnesota, I think it's like a very slim chance that they get in. I think they need a Purdue loss and then an Illinois loss as well, and they need to win out, which might not happen. But
with Illinois still having Michigan on the schedule, just looking at the schedules and what the teams have to play, Minnesota's a legitimate team, Michigan's a legitimate team. I think Illinois got a tough stretch to get there. So just looking at the schedules, I think the schedule does favor Purdue winning out and getting some help with some losses.
Which I hope they can make it, because that'll be. I think that'll save Jeff Brom's job, honestly. I think if they didn't win that game last week, I don't know if he would be at Purdue next year. Just at the Iowa game, the crowd was very upset. But
he's one of the higher paid coaches in the Big Ten, so with some expectations.
Which if he can make the Big Ten championship, he deserves that pay. But if he doesn't, then it's just weird. These teams keep beating each other. It's kind of like the Big 12. They just keep beating up on each other each week. You get a game that you think a team's going to win, and it's the opposite that happens. But
that's an interesting point, though. You're talking about Jeff Brom's job there. As we get near the end of the season, maybe some of the teams that they're not competing for a national championship, but their coaches are potentially on the hot seat depending on how the season finishes out. Purdue is one of those teams. Maybe the players rally around the coach. If they buy into him and they like his system, maybe they go out, work a little bit harder for him, and do get him to that Big Ten championship, maybe save him, another year. But that is interesting as we wind down the season. Not everyone's playing for national championship, but some coaches are definitely still coaching for their jobs.
Yeah. All right, anything else you want to talk about from Week 11?
Nope, I think we're ready to move on to Week 12.
So Louisville plays NC State with a 4.5 point spread, which NC State is still ranked according to ESPN, but I would take that Louisville spread. It's minus 4.5. Louisville looked really bad at the beginning of the season. They played somebody and just got destroyed, but now they're looking a little bit better, which many people were saying that they were going to tank for Jeff Brom, which since Jeff Brom went to Louisville and everything, but I don't know, I think the way Purdue and Louisville's playing, I don't think it's going to end up this year. I think he might go in a couple years, but your thoughts on that game at all?
I think, I'm not big on NC State football, and I think that's a good upset. Is that your upset pick for the week?
Yeah.
I think that's a solid one. I looked at two. Wisconsin goes to Nebraska. Nebraska, they're on a 4-game losing streak right now. But only one of those games was a blowout. All the other games were one-loss scores. Nebraska, even though they're losing, they do look like a better team after Scott Frost left, surprisingly. So the spread on that is a one score game. It's at Nebraska. Wisconsin hasn't looked stellar this year either, so that is potentially an upset. But I decided to go with Kansas over Texas. If you look at the raw stats, Texas looks like a very good team, but they keep blowing games.
Yeah.
I don't understand how Texas tries to lose so hard, and they're successful at it. I think Kansas, they get some of that spark back. I think they beat Texas 2 years in a row.
Yeah, they beat them last year, which was shocking. I mean, Kansas was really bad last year, and they beat Texas at Texas.
It's at Kansas this year. Look for Kansas. That's a one-score spread as well. Look for Kansas with the upset there. At least the cover.
Yeah, I have Arkansas for mine. They play Ole Miss, but it's a Mississippi 2.5 point. I think Arkansas will at least cover. I don't think it's weird with Ole Miss is they keep getting in these games and they're lowly favored, but not by much. And same thing with the LSU Ole Miss game. I think Arkansas can pull this one out. Their quarterback can run the ball very well. He's a big, strong guy. I think. And then we have Bedlam, which normally is the most talked game about for the Big 12, and this year not hearing much about it. So that might have a little bit to do with the Big 10 or Big 12 standings with their second place. Obviously TCU is running away with it, but the second place is a four-way tie, just like the Big 10 West. They have Kansas State, Oklahoma State, Baylor, and then Texas. Kansas might be able to work its way back, but I think it'll be rare to see I think 5 losses in the conference to be able to work its way back. But your thoughts on who's gonna play TCU for the title game?
If I had to look at it right now, I think Oklahoma State's probably my pick. I was high on Oklahoma State for a while, and then unfortunately they kind of misstepped. Baylor looked like a good team, but they're just kind of falling apart. I would like to see Kansas in there, personally, but I don't think they have a path. Just looking at the schedule and the remaining games and stuff.
I think Texas might be a dangerous team to play TCU just because of the offensive weapons. They have Bijan Robinson, which I think they should run the ball more, but I think they're throwing the ball too much, which I mean it's Big 12, usually it's just high offense, but they should probably run the ball more, I think. But then looking ahead this week, TCU is only favored by 2.5 points at Baylor, which to me seems like it's the number 4 team in the country against a non-ranked opponent.
Yeah, that's kind of a red flag.
Yeah.
TCU keeps falling behind and then rallying, and it just personally that's gonna bite you at some point.
Eventually, yeah.
You're gonna get a ball that doesn't bounce your way or some untimely turnover or something like that. You can't keep playing. That's not a recipe for success.
You get a missed call or late flag or something like that. Some of them might not go your way, and then.
So that is an interesting game. I didn't realize that spread was so close. Let's say TCU loses this week. And just to kind of mix things up, what does that do to college football rankings? And is the Big 12 out if TCU loses?
Yeah, I think if TCU loses, there's no chance that they make it. They might be one of the first 2 out, but I don't think there's a chance that they get back there. I think with the resume Tennessee has and with just that loss to Georgia, which Georgia obviously being the number 1 team, I think Tennessee has to be put in over TCU if TCU does lose eventually throughout the season, which I don't know if it'll be this week, but I think it'll come. I could see them getting knocked off in the Big 10 or Big 12 title, and then.
So is the Pac-12 out of it in your mind right now? Do they have a path to get back to the college football
I think
playoff?
if USC can win out, they have a chance of making it. I think it's slim, but I think if they can win out with only that one loss to Utah, which wasn't a terrible loss. At Utah,
Utah's a ranked team.
Yeah. I think they have a chance to make it. I think Oregon's kind of out of it, maybe, with their having 2 losses. Yeah. But maybe USC can, and I think they're kind of dangerous if they do make it with Lincoln Riley and Caleb Williams. I mean, Caleb Williams is a dual threat guy. He can do.
He's electric.
Yeah,
He really is. So if you had to choose between a one-loss, or the one-loss or potentially Pac-12 champion, or maybe a one-loss TCU, Big 12 champion, to get that fourth spot, like what way are we leaning here?
To me, I would go the USC. I think if you look at the Pac-12 top to bottom, their teams are stronger, especially like a TCU losing to a Big 12 team at this point would probably be like a weaker team than the Utah team was. And Utah is still, I think, in the top 10 or top 15.
Yeah, they're right there.
I think the committee can look past that loss maybe and rank that loss, I guess, over a TCU potential loss.
I would agree. I think USC would get the nod there. I think I would not be rooting for USC in the playoffs. I think they would have a potential for a lot of upset with that offense.
Yeah.
Offense is kind of this great equalizer. You get athletes out in space. They got the Blitnikoff award winner from last year at wide receiver, Addison, an electric quarterback. I could see potentially them making an upset, or at least keeping a game close. I don't think it would necessarily be a blowout. But, just bringing this back to the Big 12, like, these Big 12 matchups this weekend are pretty important. This could decide whether a USC gets in, or, like, is TCU for real? Do they finally, like, have a statement win? Baylor's unranked, but you need to have some good vibes going forward for the committee if you're going to sneak in there. There's whispers of 2 Big 10 teams getting in, whispers of multiple SEC teams getting in. I think for those reasons, it's a big week for the Pac-12 and the Big 12. They're essentially their playoffs start now. If USC loses again, or if TCU loses, I think they're potentially eliminated from the playoffs already. And now you're talking about a 2 SEC team, a 2 Big 10 team playoff. So a big week for Pac-12 and Big 12, even though we don't really view them as marquee conferences.
Yeah, and like we talked about, UCLA plays USC this week. USC's favored by 2.5. I think USC actually does take that game, maybe, just based on their offense. I mean, I think UCLA is coming off that loss. Either they're gonna play like high intensity, or they're gonna lay down and quit, in my opinion. But
I would like to see UCLA rebound and keep this close. 2.5 point spread. Vegas kind of thinks it's going to be a close game. I think USC is the better team, though. I would like to see a competitive game, just from a fan, just watching it. USC plays exciting football, and UCLA with DTR and their running game is fun to watch. And Chip Kelly, I would like to see UCLA win. I don't think they're going to, but hopefully it's a competitive game.
Going forward with the college football rankings, so we'll have the Ohio State, Michigan. Say the committee only wants to go with 1 Big 10 team. Do you think 3 SEC teams could make it in? Do you think LSU could make it in over a TCU or a USC?
I think the path for the SEC to get 3 teams in, I don't think it's going to happen. But if it were to happen, LSU would have to upset Georgia in the SEC title game. And then I think you'd have LSU, Georgia, and Tennessee potentially in. I think you'd have to have Michigan or Ohio State drop a game before the Big Ten title game, or before they play each other.
Yeah.
And then, potentially not look great in the Big Ten title game against Purdue or Iowa, whoever ends up making it. The Pac-12 and the Big 12 would have to lose. There's a lot of things that have to happen in my mind for the SEC to get 2 in, or 3. I'm sorry. 2 is a more likely scenario.
Yeah.
And if that's the case, I think it would be Tennessee and Georgia. I think LSU, or the loser of the SEC title game, LSU would be out at that point. The Big Ten title game, though, if Georgia wins, they do what they're supposed to. They would be favored in the SEC title game. If Georgia wins, the Pac-12 and the Big 12 stumble, then I think you get Georgia, Tennessee, and then if the Michigan and Ohio State game's close, if that's a one-score game, or maybe overtime or whatever the case may be, I think you could sneak in the loser of that.
Yeah.
Yes. Ohio State's ranked higher right now, so maybe we said that 2-3 ranking didn't matter. Well, when you come down to maybe bumping them up to that 4 spot, maybe Michigan moves up to 2, and then you have Tennessee 3, and then Ohio State 4, for example. That would be interesting. That would really send a message if the committee were to make that move, having a 2-conference playoff essentially.
Yeah.
That, I mean, if you're an ACC team or an athletic director in the ACC or the Pac-12 or the Big 12, like this is what the committee thinks of your quality of football at this point. That would be a pretty powerful statement.
Which in like 2 years with the combination of USC and UCLA to the Big Ten, which is crazy in my opinion, and SEC getting Texas and Oklahoma, which both of those teams really haven't been playing SEC caliber football, which for USC and UCLA, I didn't know how they would do this season, but really like they would like they'll fit in just fine with the Big Ten in my opinion. I think the geographic differences
is weird.
Yeah, but like playing wise, like on the field, I think they'll do just fine in my opinion. But
you got to think both those teams are better than Rutgers, Maryland, Indiana, Nebraska this year. Northwestern, Wisconsin this year, Iowa's offense, this year, and then you get into like kind of like the middle of the road teams. But I think they will. Geographics are weird, but it will be a good addition to the Big Ten strength schedule wise.
Lastly, our favorite teams predictions. Purdue is favored by 18.5 against Northwestern. I think they'll cover. I don't like the big spread. I prefer it to be a little lower. To me, in my opinion, when Purdue gets favored, they play worse almost, like with a big spread like that. But Northwestern's really bad, so I guess I see it. But
where's that game at?
It's at Purdue, so it's senior night for them.
Oh, some big motivation there.
Yeah.
Purdue's let me down so many times this year. Like I kind of feel your pain, being a Purdue fan. That every time I'm like, hey, this should be an easy win for Purdue. Like they should finally beat Wisconsin, and then they get absolutely crushed by Wisconsin.
They should beat Iowa.
Yeah. Ohio State's got Maryland this week. Should be an easy. I guess Maryland's probably like the upper group of that not great bottom tier Big Ten teams. The big question for Ohio State this week is can they run the ball? They have so many injuries at running back. Dylan Hayden came on last week. He's a true freshman. Looks like he has this spark. But can a true freshman kind of carry the load going into the Michigan game and potentially the Big Ten championship game? So Ohio State should win at Maryland. The things I'm looking for are can you run the ball? Can you dominate the line of scrimmage, both sides of the ball? That'll be big for just watching going forward, still trying to improve.
Is Smith and Jigma, is he still out?
Yes, Ryan Day said yesterday that at this point it's more like hopeful that he'll come back than actually optimistic.
Oh.
A lot of the speculation around Columbus is that he's going to shut it down, start preparing for the draft, which is an interesting position he's in. He did not play much this year. I think like 1-2 games he played in and just couldn't make really an impact. Going off the film of last year, he was arguably the best receiver in the country last year. Had over 1,000 yards. Had a huge Rose Bowl game, obviously. But even before the Rose Bowl, had over 100 receptions, over 1,000 yards. Does he go to the draft based on last year's performance, or does he try to come back? It's a risk of millions of dollars. We don't know the extent of his injury. Colleges don't have to disclose that kind of information. Personally, I think he's better off coming back next year and having a good year. And then being that top 10 pick. I don't think he's a top 10 pick right now with the injuries. And next year you come back, they're still going to have Marvin Harrison Jr. He's got another year before he can go to the big leagues, and so I think you come back and elevate yourself to a top 10 pick. But it's a personal decision, and I don't know if at 18 years old I could turn down millions of dollars.
Yeah.
So it's a tough choice, and I don't know his personal situation or how bad his injury is, but I do not expect him to play at all this year, based on what I read yesterday.
Anything else you'd like to add?
No, I think it's a do or die week for some Pac-12, Big 12 teams. And if you're looking ahead to the playoffs and what the combinations are going to be, there are some interesting games. Next week, I think, is when it gets real.
Yeah.
Big games in the Big Ten next week and around the country. So I think it's a good week this week. It gets better next week, and then we get to look at conference championship games.
Yep. All right, that'll do it. Have a good day.